Hey builders. In today's video, we're going to take this completely unstyled Gutenberg page and turn it into a fully designed, responsive layout complete with hover effects. And I'm going to do it without writing a single line of CSS code. Instead, I'm going to use this visual CSS editor called MicroThemer, which literally writes the CSS code for me. Now, whether you're new to CSS or a seasoned front-end developer, MicroThemer can make your workflow faster and easier, and it lets you harness more than 200 CSS properties, including Flexbox and Grid, using a visual interface. If you want to check it out for yourself, I put a link in the video description, or you can go to buildthatwebsite.com/microthemer. This link will automatically apply any current discounts or offers that MicroThemer is running, while also simultaneously supporting the channel. Now, this video is more of a tutorial than a review, but along the way, we're going to cover all the most important and popular features of MicroThemer, and by the end, you should have a good feel for both how to use the plugin and whether it's a good fit for you. So with that, let's dive in. So I've got one page here, it's called Home, and I've got some Gutenberg blocks in it. Here, I've got one Generate Blocks container block, and inside that, I've got a Generate Blocks headline, standard paragraph, standard WordPress button, and a Generate Blocks image, although this could be a regular image block as well. And to my container, and to make styling easier, I'm going to add an ID. WordPress by default lets you add both IDs and classes to elements, and this helps make styling easier by providing a selector that you can target. So we're going to select the container block here and just scroll down to advanced. And I'm going to call this my home hero container. Let's look at this on the front end. And it looks exactly the same as it does in the back end, and it looks like basically nothing. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a cool grid-based hero section layout. I'm going to make my theme more of a dark mode theme. And the layout that I'm going to be building for my hero section today is very much inspired by the adminbar.com. They recently did a full makeover of their site using Generate Blocks. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. And they've got some great tutorials on Generate Blocks and Generate Press if you're interested. Check them out on YouTube or the adminbar.com. Okay, so let's get started styling. We're just going to launch MicroThemer here. And once it's installed, this will appear in your admin bar at the top. And the first thing I like to do, if this is my first time using MicroThemer on a site, is to go to the settings cog here. Under settings and then preferences, I always like to change this. I think this is on by default usually. It adds the important rule to all CSS styles, but this could have some unintended consequences. It can actually overwrite rules elsewhere on your site that you're not aware of, and it can sort of make things break. So I like to turn this off, and then I just have to be more conscientious of choosing the correct selectors to make sure that they override my theme's existing styles. So I'm going to save preferences. MicroThemer starts in basically a targeting mode, and right now there's no settings on the side here, but as soon as we select an element to target, it's going to give us all of the properties, CSS properties available. So I'm just going to try to find the body elements. I'm just going to click here. And I did manage to select the body element correctly, but if you didn't find the exact element you want, you can retarget by clicking another element, or you can use these buttons to step through the child elements, or you can choose the next sibling in the container. It makes it really easy to find the correct element. There's also a built-in inspector, similar to like Chrome or Firefox's inspector, where you can click inspect and you can actually choose the element you want directly from the HTML. So if I click on this element here, it'll go right to that in the document. And I could, for example, click this element in the HTML and it will change my selector. So I'm going to close the inspector for now. And the first step of using MicroThemer is to choose a selector. So what we've done here is it's got the body element, but it's selected a different element than the one I want to target. And so when this happens, there's a couple ways to do this. You can scroll down the list and look for the exact selector that you want to target. For example, I could just click on the body element because I want the least specificity here. Or you can go into the code view and you can manually type the selector, or you can manually type the selector here. So for example, I'm just going to write body, and this is the name for your selector. So we're going to click Save Selector. And what's great about MicroThemer is it will save all your selectors that you've created in these folders here. So you can easily re-access the exact selectors that you've previously, if you want to change or add some styles to a specific element. So now that we've gotten that selector, we are going to add a background color. With MicroThemer, you get all these properties to choose from, and you can just literally point and click your way to writing these CSS rules. So I'm going to start and I'm going to go to the background property, And I'm going to set a background color here. I'm just going to paste this in. And you can see that we have this element here now has its own color as well. We need to get rid of that. So I'm going to add a selector there. And while we're going to make the whole site dark mode, maybe we will want white background for the text area and other pages. So I'm just going to target this rule to the home page. And we can change the background color here to transparent. All right, so now we've got dark mode here. And if we are to click on the code tab, you can see that it has written those rules directly in here. And here you can navigate through your saved selectors. These are ones that you've already created. So I'm going to go back to my previous selector, and we're also going to add a default body color. So you don't have to hit enter or anything like I'm doing. Again, you can work with code if you want. You can manually write the styles right in MicroThemer. But I'm going to go to font, and just as the base font color for body fonts, I'm going to do like a lighter gray. We'll say we want to make the headings a bit bolder, so we'll make them white. So we can click on this to change our targeting options and click on the dropdown. Again, it's going to suggest some selectors we can use. And again, because this is a one-off page, maybe I'll use the post 9 ID and the H2. So all the headings on this page will have the setting. We're going to save the selector, and I can rename the selector. So it can be home H2 headings. This is just a descriptive name that now when we go into our folder here, we can see our current selectors. So I've selected that, and we're going to make these straight white. So it just sticks out a little bit more. Now I could manually disable the page title in GeneratePress on the back end, but I could also just hide it with CSS. So we could go to the behavior property, and for display, we can change it from block, scroll down to none, and that is gone. And next we are going to set up the layout for our hero section, and we're going to use my favorite feature of MicroThemer, and that's the grid layout. There's no other visual CSS editor that I know of that has this drag and drop grid creation technology. And it's so cool. I'm going to show you how it works. So we're going to make sure we have our selector right. So I'm going to use the inspector, and we want the home hero container. Remember, we added the ID in the back end already. And I like that name there. So we're going to save that name. We're going to save that selector, but I almost screwed this up. What we actually want, if we look at the HTML down here in the inspector, if you can see it, is we actually want the inside container, because Generate Blocks creates an outer container and an inner container. And when with working with things like Flexbox or Grid, the grid only applies to the immediate child elements. So we want to make sure that we make this inside container the one that has the grid. So we're going to adjust our selector, and we're going to use the home hero GB inside container selector. And I like that. And we'll say home hero GB inner. And we're going to go to the grid settings here. And all we have to do is change the display to grid. Now it will automatically place all these elements in our grid. And right now it's just created a 1x4 grid because there's 4 child elements. But we can take this little slider here, and if you can see the sort of blue outline, we can drag it to create any sort of grid we want. So I'm going to create a 3x3 grid for now, and we can adjust this later. And you can take each of these elements and individually place them on the grid. So our 4 element is the image here. I'm going to move that off to the side. And I'm just going to click on this first element, the headline, and I'm going to drag it across 2 rows. Next, I'll take the number 2 element, which is this paragraph, drag it across 2 rows, and take the number 3, which is my button here, drag it across 2 rows. Then we can take our image, and I want this to be the full height, take up the whole right side there. I'm having a little trouble dragging, but let's put it on top and stretch it across that whole other side. Okay, so now we have basically the layout that we want, but we want to adjust the sizings. Now, one way to do this would be you could certainly just change the number of squares that you're using, change the grid. So maybe make it like a 5x3 grid, and then have the image wrap across 2 columns. But you can also adjust how wide each column and row in the grid is. So let's go back to our selector. I'm going to go back and find my selector that I was using, Home Hero GB Inner. And if you scroll down under the template, you can see the size of our columns. But we can actually adjust how wide the columns and rows are. And then we can do this for each individual column in a row. So I'm actually going to take these, and I think I'm going to drag them back into their own column here. One column here, then a blank column here, and then the image in another column. And we're going to use this middle column to create a gap. So I'm going to make column number 2. If I scroll down in the template to columns, I'm going to give this an 80 pixel gap on desktop. And that's already looking pretty good. These are each about the same size. So the image is about the same width. So currently the image is 1 fractional unit and the text is 1 fractional unit. And so I think that looks pretty good to my eye, but we do have to get this spacing right. So these 2 columns are currently the same width, and I actually want to make them a little bit different. So we're going to try to make the image slightly smaller, and I think we'll make this gap a little bit bigger. And I think that's starting to look pretty good. Now, in terms of the rows, these are each sized auto, and basically they're just sort of filling the space. But I want to switch one of these to fractional units. And so it'll take up all the available space, and the other ones will be set to auto. That will sort of smooth out our grid a little bit. And as you get used to working with grid, you can make this, get the layout you want. But now you can see that this is basically the same layout as the hero section on the admin bar. So now what we have to do is style it. So we can adjust the text size here, and we're going to use our selector, Home Hero P at auto suggested. I like that. That's a good selector. And we're going to go to font, and we'll make the font size 20 pixels. And you can see it's putting this margin on the bottom. It's showing you when you select it. So we can go to the margin settings, and I believe that's under spacing. And you can see that it has automatically pulled in the margin that our theme is applying. And we can change this. So we can make it 10 pixels bottom margin. So that should pull the button up a little bit. Next, let's style this button. So I'm going to click on that, and we're going to look at our selector, and it's chosen Home Hero, the ID, and WP block button link. That is exactly what I want to target. So we're going to save that selector, and we'll call it Home Hero button. And now let's go to the settings. So we're going to go to background, and I'm going to give it a background color. I think we'll do like a purple mode. And I'm going to make this a branded color that we can reuse throughout our site. And MicroThemer does support CSS variables, and you'll see how we're going to set this up later. I'm not sure how to use the interface to create CSS variables, but we can create them manually. So I'm going to go to the code editor, and I'm just going to create a new selector, body selector, and we're going to create a variable. We're going to call it brand primary color, and we'll make it this color. So what did I choose this color as? Okay. So now we've defined that variable, and I'm going to show you how we can use that later on. So we're still got this chosen as our selector, and we're going to adjust the width here. So we're going to go to dimensions, and we're going to say we want it to take up 100%, and we're going to make that one 100% width. Now our selector is working properly. We're going to select it again just by clicking on the HTML code here, and we're going to set it a max width. We'll say 225 pixel max width. And let's make that a bit bigger, 250 pixels. And we're going to go to the border settings, and that's right here. We want border radius. So we're going to go border radius, click link, and now we have a nice subtle border. If we want it to look just like the adminbar.com, we could probably adjust the text here too. So I'm going to go back to my selector. We'll go to text, font. Let's change the font size, make it a bit bigger. Under text settings, you could transform it to uppercase if you wanted. And we could change the color to something close to that black that the body is using. And if I just want to preview this, you can see we're starting to look pretty good here. All right, next up, I'm going to go back to my, what do I want? Home Hero. And we're going to give it a background color, background. I'm going to paste in this slightly off black here. And under border, we're going to give it a border. We're going to say 1 pixel, link them all. Border color, we're going to give it like a less black. And we'll have to see how that looks. And we're going to say solid. Again, link them. Go down to the spacing tab. And it's nice that it hovers. When you hover, it shows you the name. And we're going to try 40 pixels all the way around and link it. We'll give it a border radius too. Let's try 12 pixels, and we'll save it. And on the front end, we're looking pretty good. Oh, and one more thing I want to show you how to do is we can also, of course, add pseudo states or hover states to our elements. Okay, so we've got our home hero button selected. And if you click these three dots here, you can go to the edit selector, and we're just going to add a hover state to our element. So we're going to click update, and it's going to create a new selector for us. And we can add a couple things. So we're going to give it a trend. Let's see. So we're going to give it a background color, and we'll just make it almost white, which should look fine. And we also want to give it a bit of transition to animate the difference. And we'll just say transition for all, and we'll say 0.25 seconds. And you can see there's a nice fade as you hover over a button. And what's amazing is we were able to take 4 elements stacked on top of each other, create this grid layout, and we're using way less nested elements than you would use if you were using something like a page builder, or even if you were trying to build this using just generate blocks, because it would require at least like 2 more layers of container blocks to get this layout. Okay, next up, we're going to create this card design using Flexbox, absolute positioning, and hover animation. All right, next I'm going to create one more section for a page. And again, we're going to use generate blocks for this. So I'm going to go add a block, and we'll just add a container block. And I'm going to show you how I build this from scratch. And inside that, we're going to add one more container. So this can be the inner container. In this inner container, we're going to add an image. Going to add a heading, make it a H2 heading, give them a name. And then we're going to add some paragraph text. And if we look at the structure, we can see that we have our outer container for this row and then the inner container for this block. And what we're going to do is we're going to make 3 of these. We're just going to duplicate it and swap out the images and text. You don't have to stick around for that. But one thing I do want to do is I'm going to give this outer container an ID. Again, for the styling. So we'll call this our homepage cards. And I'm going to give the inner container a class. We'll call it homepage card class. And that way, when we duplicate this, and I can just go duplicate, the selector will be copied as well. So we can click update, and we're going to go back to the front end, reload the page, and we can start styling this stuff too. All right, so I've swapped out the images and text, and back on the front end, again, we just kind of have a mess here. So how do we turn this into a real cool card design? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a nice row layout using Flexbox, which again is built into MicroThemer. So first we need to just step out and find that parent element that we want to make a Flexbox. And we can just click parent element to step through. And you can see this is the homepage card ID. This is the homepage cards ID, the outer one. So we can step out to there. And then, of course, we want to actually target the inner container because, again, Flex only applies to the immediate to the elements immediately inside it. So we're going to make the Flex items be these homepage cards, and the Flex container is going to be this GB inside container. So let's create our selector. And it's already selected this one, homepage cards.div. That is a perfectly good selector. You could also use homepage cards.inside container. So we're going to go with that one. Just going to name it better. And it's already given us our name. So let's call it homepage cards inner. Save that selector. And we're just going to go down to the Flexbox right here. And we can say display flex. And I realized the mistake I made with my selector. Let's go back and fix this selector. And you can do that by choosing retarget selector. And what I did is this is targeting any GB inside container, which includes the ones that are around these cards. You can see these have now been turned into Flex items too, and that is not what I want. So what I want to do is go back to this selector, which only targets the container immediately inside the homepage cards container. So we're going to click update, and now this is looking closer to what I want. So we've got card, and now we need to get the layout right inside of these. So let's go, and we're going to target our rule to these homepage cards. And so let's get our selector right again. Homepage cards, homepage card. That is what we want. So we want to target the rule at all the cards. And you'll notice if I move this off to the side, you can see this green box around all these that's showing you which elements this rule targets. Whereas if I use this one, it only targets that element. So it's really handy for choosing the right selectors. And we're going to save the selector. We're going to add a bit of space between them. So we use the spacing one, and we're just going to give it some left and right margins. Let's say 10 pixels and 10 pixels. And we can do the same thing top and bottom, I guess. So we would just link them. And that will be useful for when they're stacked on top of each other. And now we are going to, I know these images are all different sizes. And ordinarily, if I had the image in its own container, you could make them have the same sort of aspect ratio at the top of this card to make a standard card layout. But I'm going to make a non-traditional card where the image actually covers the entire card. We're going to position it absolutely, and then the text is going to be on top of that. So we're going to get to see some of the cooler features, the positioning features built into MicroThemer. So let's get the selector right again. Go here, homepage cards. And if you don't like the selectors that it creates, you can always write your own. So I want to target this at any image element, basically, that's inside one of these homepage cards. So we're just going to target the IMG tag, and you can see it's selecting all these images to show what our selector is. And of course, we could add the homepage cards ID in front of that too, for just in case you wanted to. All right, so we're going to save that selector, homepage card image. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this position absolute. One thing we need to do first, actually, well, I'll show you. So we are going to go down to the positioning tab, and instead of static, we're going to make it absolute. And we're going to go top 0, bottom 0, left 0, right 0. Now you can see we have a problem. These are flying all over the place. And that's because absolute positioning is positioned relative to the nearest parent that has relative positioning, or at least not static positioning. So we need to go back to our general homepage cards, and we are just going to give them a position of relative. And you can see that magically fixed itself. Now we do have some issues. These images are covering the text because absolute position elements float on top, but we can fix that as well. So let's go back to our selector, make sure we have the right one. I want my homepage card image, and we're going to give it a z-index of -1. And you also can see that these images are actually breaking out of the boundaries of the card. So we need to go back to our card here, homepage cards, and under the behavior, I believe. Yep. Behavior, we basically want to clip this image so it won't be visible outside the container. So we're going to go not display, but overflow hidden. Dun, 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 dun. All right, making progress. Next, we need to make sure these cards are tall enough. So for dimensions, we'll give it a min height, say 400 pixel minimum. And under spacing, I'm going to give some padding at the top just to push down the text here so we don't have to position that. And we're just going to go, I don't know, 200 pixels of padding at the top to push the text down. And we can adjust these later. Let's see, maybe 250 pixels of padding. And we're also going to adjust the right and left padding. So let's try 25, 25, and 25. And then again, I don't know what happened to our margin here, but we're just going to put this back, left and right, margin between the cards, and we'll link it. Okay. All right. Just to preview how our cards are looking here. We're making progress, but not perfect yet. So again, we're going to go find our homepage card image selector. We want to make sure it covers the entire card, not irrespective of what the aspect ratio is. You can see the aspect ratio of these images is very different. Okay, so to fix that, we're going to go to the dimensions tab. Sometimes it takes a little while to figure out where everything is, but once you get it mastered, I think it's really going to speed up your workflow. And you could of course set like a min height or something for these images, but what we're going to use is the object fit property. That's a newer CSS property, but it's so handy. And we're just going to say object fit cover, and we're going to say the height is 100% of the container. So it has to cover all the container, and it's just going to adjust the image to make sure it fits correctly. And object's position, we could just put it in the center, which I think is what the default is already. We're going to go back to our card design here. And I'm going to give it a border radius. So let's try 5 pixels all around. And we're going to go to our just our homepage cards selector. We're going to save this one. I don't think we've saved the outer parent yet. And we're just going to give it some space from the hero section above. So we go to spacing and we'll say margin top, 50 pixels, margin bottom, 50 pixels. And we'll give it a bit of padding as well. I'm going to say 20 pixels all around. And we'll link those. And if we preview this on the front end, it's starting to really come together. The last thing I want to do here is make it through the text is visible and also add a cool hover effect. And again, I'm going to show you some of the cool transition and transform properties that are built into MicroThemer. So let's go do that. We'll grab our selector, homepage card image. Let's start with opacity. So there's a black background behind it. So maybe we can tone down the opacity to make the text more visible. And that did indeed work. And last up, I want to give these a hover effect. So let's just go back to the selector here. We're going to choose hover. And I actually want to adjust this. I want it to be when I hover over the homepage card, we're going to change what happens to the image. So we're going to click update for our selector, and we're going to use the transform, and we're just going to scale the image. So we'll say 1.04 and link that. Okay, and that's quite jerky as it is. So we need to use the transition, and we'll say all, and again, we can do 0.3 seconds or something. And we could also restore the opacity. Let's go back to behavior. And when it hovers, we could just say opacity is back to 1, just to make it extra vibrant. And if we go on the front end, it looks pretty good. And you can go even further. You could give the paragraph text maybe like a transparent background, like a darker background on hover, just so it was more visible. It's sort of up to your imagination what you can do. Next up, let's look at how MicroThemer works with CSS variables. If you remember, we just defined that CSS variable color for this brand primary color earlier, but we haven't used it anywhere. So let's click on this button, and you can see that we've just manually set the background color. But let's go into our background settings here. And if we click on the color option, you can see this enter variable section here. Now, if we click on this these three dots here, you can see that we have these site variables that are defined by WordPress already. If we want to resample and pull the new variables that we've written in the code, we can click this resample button right here, and you can see it's pulled in our brand primary color that we've defined. And so we can set that as the background color here. Nothing will change because it's the same color as we had already manually set. But now look at this. We can go here, for example, we'll choose a different selector, and I'm going to go to the card. And let's give it a hover effect. So we're going to go to the hover state, and we're going to give it a border color. And for our border color, we're going to choose that variable, and it's already populated here, but you could also type it in here. You could type manually type it in, or you can go and again, select it from that list. So we're going to give that the hover color. We'll give it a border of 1 pixel all the way around and make it solid. And we'll also link all these colors too. And it should be, if we click out of this, and we refresh the page, it's automatically pulled in that brand color. Hopefully you can see it. I know it's thin. But just to give you an example of the power of CSS variables, let's just do this on the front end here. I'm going to go to this variable definition. If I change what this color is, I can make it red, and it will change all the instances where this is used on the site. So this button color is now red, but also the hover color for these elements is now red. This lets you completely rebrand your site without redoing all the CSS. All right, the last thing I want to do here is show you how the media queries work, because if we look at our page here, if we were to preview this at a different width, it's not going to look quite as nice. I mean, the top section looks okay until you get to here, and then now it looks pretty bad. And these cards are quite squished. So we need to create some media queries that will change the layout on smaller screen sizes. And MicroThemer makes this super easy. You can use the pre-built breakpoints. This is like the mobile breakpoint, tablet breakpoint, and some intermediate breakpoint sizes. And it also lets you preview them at this size. Or you can define your own breakpoints. So you could create, for example, only screen sizes that are greater than 1300 pixels or something, and save this as your own breakpoint for your project. But we're just going to use this pre-built breakpoint and change our layout here. So first, let's make sure we've selected the correct element. I'm going to go to homepage hero inner, and that's the one that's controlling our grid layout. And let's go to that breakpoint that we wanted to work on. And in the grid settings, we're going to change the grid layout. So we're going to make it a 1x1 grid, and we could just pull our elements down here. And we can put the image on top, for example, if we want. So we'll grab that image, place it on top of the grid. And I think maybe I want to reorder that. So let's try that again. And I think we also want to center our content. So let's go. Actually, I believe we want the parent element here. And it was put to text align center. So that should center the button. And now we'll watch the page collapses. And that looks good. Now we want to do the same thing for the cards. The only difference here, if we find the correct parent here, homepage cards, is that we're using Flexbox for this. So this is display flex. And there's a couple different solutions we could do. We could change the flex wrap to wrap and allow these to reflow if this gets too narrow. So we could go to wrap. You can see they'll stack on top of each other automatically. The other way you could do that is you could change the flex direction to column, and it would do the exact same thing. I think I'll also do text align center. And we just may add a bit of padding, a bit more padding on the left and right. So let's say 25 pixels left and right. And if we view this, it now looks perfectly normal on a small screen. Okay, so that was quick and easy, and all that can be done right in the MicroThemer interface. And if you ever want to see all the code that you've had written in one place, you can just go to the settings tab here, click on generated code, and this will show you the entire style sheet that this is created for you. Now, if you're interested in digging even deeper into MicroThemer's capabilities, there's a couple things you can do. First off, you can check out my full written review at buildthatwebsite.com, which I will link down in the video description. Secondly, if you want me to start featuring MicroThemer in future tutorials on the channel, please let me know in the comment section. I will consider doing so. And thirdly, you can go to buildthatwebsite.com/microthemer to pick up a copy for yourself and fully immerse yourself in its capabilities. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, tell your friends, and check out this video right over here.